now I'm going to turn to State Representative Kelly Cassidy, who is joining us now. Thank you very much, Representative Cassidy. Kelly Cassidy is a longtime and well-known legislator representing the 14th District on Chicago's North Side. Her legislative and policy hallmarks have been her work on women's and LGBTQ rights, healthcare, social justice. She's been very outspoken on issues and challenges related to sexual harassment, sexism, and racism in government and politics. And there's been a lot of conversation about that. So there's plenty to talk about with you tonight. Well, welcome, Representative Cassidy.
Thanks so much for having me.
So are you at home tonight?
I am at home tonight. I made a decision to not go to an indoor event tonight, so I'm home with my kids instead.
Wise and safe. Well, thanks for taking the time out from the kids to join us. So I don't know if you heard the earlier conversation, but we were talking some about the new abortion law coming out of Texas, which, as you know, is created a tremendous amount of controversy, and it really amounts to almost a total ban on abortion in Texas. Yep. It's had reverberations across the country. I'd like to get your take on how it might impact Illinois, and if you have any concerns about something like that. I think the answer is probably no, is about something like that being enacted in Illinois, given that we're such a blue state. But what impact is it having here, and what concerns does it raise for you?
Well, I mean, frankly, every time a state does this, it has an impact on Illinois, because we are a destination for patients fleeing their home states when they can't get care there. I learned that Florida introduced a twin of the Texas law today, so we can imagine, that this is going to spread. We already were seeing patients from other states when we passed the Reproductive Health Act. We've got a clinic down in far southern Illinois, Hope Clinic for Women in Granite City, that sees a huge number of patients, not just from Missouri, which is that's 10 minutes away from them, but from all of our surrounding states. They're already seeing Texas patients. Clinics here in Chicago are already seeing Texas patients, but we have to remember, those are the folks who have the means to travel, to take a day off, to find childcare for their kids, to find a way to pay to travel and stay here. While I am glad that we're able to provide services to some of the folks that are affected by this, the reality is it's really having a chilling effect on reproductive health access around the country.
And so what does that mean for you? Are there any new policy opportunities that you can respond to here?
Sure. So I heard President Harmon mention, Illinois is a blue island in a sea of red, in particular on this issue, and that's something we've done with intentionality. And when I passed the Reproductive Health Act, I referred to it as a firewall around the state of Illinois. That firewall has a big gaping hole in it that's already impacting folks with the existence of the Parental Notice of Abortion Act. Just imagine for a moment, already talking about the hurdles I talked about of getting here from Texas, but, jumping through all those hoops and then finding out you have to appear in court as well. So hopefully we will take this opportunity to repeal PNA, the Parental Notice of Abortion Act, and complete the firewall that the Reproductive Health Act has built.
So President Harmon said that in the upcoming veto session, he will call it in his chamber. What is the process in the House? Is this, who's going to champion it? Is it you, someone else? Do you see any opposition or what?
There is opposition, just as there was when we were trying to pass the Reproductive Health Act. There are a lot of folks who don't like taking tough votes walking into an election year. So there are a lot of folks who are concerned that this is a politically challenging vote, who question whether it really needs to happen right now. And so we are pushing hard on that. Anna Moeller, my colleague from the Elgin area, is the lead sponsor. I'm one of the chief co's and work in that roll call with her. We're ready for the Senate to send it over to us and to push this over the finish line.
You believe the Senate will go first? See, and here is why this is a tough one among the abortion rights supporters, because we're not talking about parental permission. We're talking about what is the cutoff age? 16, 18 in Illinois for notice?
I don't remember. I believe it's 16, but I could be wrong.
So you're just saying you have to notify your parents, which as a practical matter, since we all live in the real world, that's could prevent a young woman from getting an abortion. But you're also talking about parental rights. And my goodness, I just think do you find that you want to protect the health of young women in Illinois, but how could you just quickly give your best argument on why you're not trampling on parental rights among parents who are strongly pro-choice? How do you?
That same pregnant person could give birth without getting permission from their parents. That same pregnant person could get all sorts of procedures without getting permission from their parents, and without facing potential abuse. I have talked about, I left home when I was almost 17, and I'm incredibly thankful that I didn't face this challenge, that I didn't get pregnant, because having to go back to the father that I ran from in the middle of the night to tell him, because frankly, there's very little difference between permission and notice, right? If I told my father, I would need proof that I told my father, which is him signing something that I had told him. And if he doesn't want to sign it, he's not going to sign it. And so, we talk about notice as if it's no big thing, but the truth is you can't legislate good parental relationships. You can't legislate how a family operates. And
is a fig leaf. So the Illinois parental notice law, if I heard you right, is a fig leaf for what would have been an even tougher vote in Illinois parental permission law.
Exactly. And I was working for NOW when this bill was passed. It's deeply personal to me because it was one of the big losses we took during those years. And the shift to parental notice over parental consent was literally done from a PR perspective to sound more reasonable, but the outcome is the same. The result of sending a young pregnant person back to potentially the person that caused the pregnancy, quite frankly, is the same. Whether you're saying they have to say, okay, you can do this, or yes, you told me. I mean, what's going to make that father say anything? So it is a fig leaf is a great way to put it. It's just a fiction. And then putting an already traumatized youth in front of a judge who maybe has never had to navigate any systems like that, it's horrific, and it's cruel, and it's unnecessary. Especially, as I said, that person could go through with the pregnancy and deal with trying to raise a child alone without ever getting any consent or notification to their parents.
So what are the numbers in the House? How many would you say would support this? Who would be on the fence? When you whip it, or that is, so people listen, when you assess who is where, what are your starting numbers in your chamber?
The roll call is pretty solid. We have a strong pro-choice majority. We've got some folks who are concerned about whether or not they want to take this vote now. And we're in a position where now is when it has to happen. These folks are coming into our state. What do we do when they get here? How do we help them navigate the system? But also, we are putting young people in danger every day that this law remains on the books. We've got amazing.
I'm sorry, and is it also true now is important politically, because it will be much more difficult to get to push this through an election year, right? I mean, next year would be even more difficult.
I would think so. And I mean, I find that calendar thing rather challenging because, we're on 2-year terms. It's always an election year in the House. And so I've heard it argued that this year is too hard because we're leading up to an election year and people will decide to run against me. And then next year it is the election year and the voters are going to freak out. It's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. And the truth is, take the vote, communicate with your constituents about why it was important, lead your constituents to understand why it was important, and get it done.
So I have a question on kind of another topic. And I know, Laura, did you have another follow-up?
No, go ahead, Lynn. I'll follow you.
Okay, you have in Southern Illinois, some heavily Trump turf. And I know there's at least one lawmaker, Chris Miller, whose wife is a Congresswoman, Mary Miller, freshman, who are Trump people. And how much of Trumpism has seeped into the chamber by the Republicans who are in the minority, but nonetheless, there is some Republicans who started a petition for recall provisions how do you assess the Trumpism factor in your chamber? And I know you're well in the majority, but where do you see that permeating into bills, policy, and discussions?
Yeah, that's a great question, and the truth is it's been seepage since before we could call it Trumpism. When I first came in, and honestly, until 2019, in passing the Reproductive Health Act, I had never passed a bill that didn't have a bipartisan roll call.
Uh-huh.
That was a very intentional thing on my part. I could have 60 Democratic votes and I would still work the other side of the aisle and work the whole roll call, and I continue to do that. But it does get harder. There is less desire to work cooperatively sometimes. But I'm also seeing it as we are creeping up towards this primary with, even some of the members of the Republican caucus who tend to be more moderate, tossing out press release bills that really could have been written by members of the Eastern Bloc, which is how we refer to, I think they refer to themselves that way, quite frankly, the Chris Millers and several others who are really leading the anti-COVID masks are fascism kind of stuff. So we're even seeing some of the moderates like dip their toe there, which is disheartening.
What can Illinois do to prevent kind of a prophylactic, a pre-buttal for what may be, if we have copycats from other states, assertions well before an election that if Republicans lose, it's because the election is rigged. They could say it for a state rep race, congressional, the governor's race, Senate race. What safeguards can you put in place to try and address this, since it might be happening in Illinois? Not that we have election problems. I hope everyone who's listening knows I'm talking about the assertion that happened in the California race, where the leading Republican said, though he backed down, if I lose, it's because it's rigged. And of course, you have former President Trump out there continuing with his election denialism. Your assessment?
I will say I was really pleasantly surprised to hear him back away from that, because the bottom line is we're talking about an audience for whom truth is not, it doesn't matter. And so all of the things we do, any information we put out, if that segment doesn't want to believe it, they're not going to believe it. They believe what they want to believe. So it's really challenging to combat that kind of disinformation. Being more transparent, being more visible is our only real benefit. But we had some of that going on during a little bit of it. It started to boil up during the last election here. It's very difficult to combat that kind of disinformation, because our only weapon is the truth. And if you're impervious to the truth, I don't know what you do with that.
So I'd like to Representative Cassidy, bring it back a little bit more locally, back to Chicago, and particularly for our Chicago viewers. But I'm going to expand on this, and that is the hot topic in Chicago and the Chicago City Council is 45th Ward Alderman Jim Gardner, who has gotten himself into a lot of hot water with the publication of a series of tweets, comments, not tweets, but texts that he has, where he's demeaned women, used very offensive language against women, and has also gone after some of his own constituents and suggested that he might retaliate against constituents that he disagrees with. It's gotten him, as I said, into a lot of trouble, and you have been a leading voice pushing back on this. He has apologized for at least for the text that he said, and we refer to specific women in politics, but there's still a lot out there that people are very unhappy about. And one of the things that you've done is you signed on to a letter asking Act Blue, the major progressive PAC, to ban him essentially. And then you've also, as I understand, you've been pushing the Democratic Party to censure him in some way. So could you update us on where those efforts stand and what your view is on what should happen with Alderman Gardner?
Sure. So the first thing I did was join with several of my fellow committee people. I'm one of the Democratic, the 49th Ward Democratic Committee person, in addition to being the state rep. So I joined with several of my fellow committee people to ask that the county party take whatever steps are within our power to censure him. That complaint is before our Rules and Bylaws Committee, but I'm not sure what the timeline is on that. The Act Blue thing is one that came up a little bit more recently, and I'm less well informed about where that one stands. It sounds like he's got stuff coming at him from a lot of different angles. And I have to say, I don't know what was more shocking to me when it first was brought to my attention. I've had words with a lot of colleagues, and I'm sure I've been called lots of the names that he used in his text by colleagues, and that's different. Going after staff is never okay. Our staff are not paid well enough to take that, and they don't deserve it. And then the constituent thing just really boggled my mind. I mean, I have constituents I don't agree with. I spent a lot of time during the pandemic helping chase firearm owner ID cards that were being delayed for my constituents, in spite of the fact that I'm one of the loudest voices for gun control in the chamber. But they're my constituents. They needed service from state government. That's my job, and so I did it. I ended up doing it for people from all over the state because the internet does things like, hey, call Kelly Cassidy. And so they did. And so I helped them. So it was mind-boggling to me, constituents. So those, I can't decide which of those was more offensive to me, to be honest.
Yeah, now the constituent piece is, it's all terrible, but the constituent piece is even more serious legally, because that could be illegal. And in fact, the FBI is investigating him as we speak, reportedly.
It sure seems like that's the thing that's going to get him.
Yeah, but you said that you're sure that you've been called names before, and of course we may have all been called names, but when you get it in black and white in the text, it's hard to deny it. And I guess I'm wondering why people are not more outraged. There was a petition or a letter going around the Chicago City Council, and as I understand, at least the last time I checked, only like maybe half of the city council has signed on to it. And it's not like the Cook County Democratic Party is calling an emergency meeting tomorrow to act on this censure. So what is that about? Is it elected officials are afraid if they go after one of their own, they're next?
Possibly. I mean, I can't speak to what's in the minds of my colleagues in either body, but for me, again, like I said, going after staffers was an offense level that I couldn't ignore. Going after constituents was deeply offensive to me. So, I can speak to what led me to act on it. As someone who has stood up for staff in Springfield who are bullied, I'm going to be consistent and call that out when I see it. Hopefully more people will do that as a matter of course, but I don't know what's in folks' heads when they make these decisions.
That letter that went to Act Blue, I think that the letter referred to, and you signed off on that letter, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, the letter referred to Alderman Gardner as Chicago's very own Donald Trump.
Yes, that was an interesting little accent on there, little cherry on the cake, if you will.
A little cherry on the cake. We're almost out of time. Lynn, did you have one last question you want to jump in with?
Well, I guess, this is a little political show, so I have some political handicapping. Of the Republicans running for governor, who do you think is the greatest threat to Governor J.B. Pritzker?
I mean, I don't think we've seen the whole field yet. And so far, none of them are too terribly impressive. I mean, I've served with Darren Bailey. I do worry about how much of a following he has, but I worry more in terms of what the well-being of our state than anything else.
Representative, he is the strongest Trumper of the field so far, right?
He is, yeah.
Right, and
but petitions don't hit the streets until January, so I think it's possible we'll see more. I think that Governor Pritzker has made a pretty solid case for reelection. He's had a very steady hand through times that I don't know that anybody would really want to have to be in charge of. It certainly wasn't what any of that administration signed up for, but they stepped up to the challenge without a question.
So he seems to be leaning pretty heavily on the COVID, or making the case that he handled the COVID crisis very well. Do you think that's the strongest card he has to play?
I mean, honestly, I think he's got an amazing hand, period. It's not, I don't think there's one card. I think that, you know, after 4 years of inaction in the Rauner administration, we came out of the gates pretty strong in 19 and got a lot of work done that needed doing. And, you know, then the pandemic hit, and, you know, I don't think anybody could say they know the best way to get through that. I mean, it was unprecedented. And, you know, I watched that team just stay steady and just keep moving, even through challenges and stumbles. They just kept moving to get us out of this.
And speaking of moving, we need to move on to our next segment. Representative Kelly Cassidy, thanks